So we'd like to welcome William Elliott from RIoT Solutions this morning. He's going to take us through some issues around cybersecurity. Given that it's no longer just the realm of IT teams, it's sort of up to everybody to be aware of what's going on. And I guess the rapid development of the technologies and the way people are trying to access systems. I think there's some serious risks out there for local governments, and you can see that there's been a lot targeted around the place of late. So I'll hand over to Will, who will take you through his presentation. Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Tony. Let's bring it up. So I hope everyone can see that. So thank you very much for having me, everyone. I was just saying to Tony and the team, it's always a pleasure to talk of these things before incidents. So as introduced, my name is William Elliott. I work for RIoT Solutions. We're a Queensland-based company, around about 60 people here in Queensland. We're a specialist cybersecurity security practice. I had actually quite a lot of time to put this presentation together, and I've done it in a non-technical manner. So I hope you understand that I'm not going to bombard you with over the technical jargon. I'm going to try and make this as generic as possible. I thought I'd start it off by calling this everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I'll take you on a bit of a journey, but really the point I wanted to take here is that the amount of companies that we deal with, and breaches and incident responses we investigate, it has just been amazing to see how unprepared businesses are. That cybersecurity is a defensive game, and it's your ability to defend yourself which is the most critical point. And when you do inevitably get punched, it's how you weather that event and the resiliency that you have to bounce back as quickly as possible, which is the key to all of this. I put together a very slow montage here of how busy we have been in the last 6 months of this year. Again, every year is a big year for us, but this one particularly has been extraordinary. We're calling it a Ransomware Rampage. A lot of these sit in your sector particularly, but it's been quite extraordinary. A majority of these we've been involved in personally from a forensics and an incident response point of view. I'm sure you would have seen some of these headlines. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what you're seeing. These are companies who have voluntarily disclosed that they have been breached. The amount of companies who haven't reported breaches or are unaware of breaches is actually quite frightening. So why is everyone picking on you? And in turn, particularly your LGFP association. Was really interesting when I do some intel gathering, and I'm sure you'd know this, but you are very, very attractive targets. You sit in this, as far as I can tell, in this dual role of being in public administration, but also in the financial sector. Now, those two markets independently are absolutely a target for cyber criminals. Now, I'm not talking about foreign interference or nation state attack. I'm purely talking around your typical cyber criminals. So this was a report that's just been recently released, just showing the methodology and approach that are used against people such as yourselves, and why it's so attractive. They're usually very successful, and the attacks will keep coming. So this trend specifically isn't going away. On top of that, which I think is a good thing, is that now cybersecurity is a board level concern. Now, I've been doing this for close on 20 years, and it used to be a struggle just to get into your executive management team. It's completely turned on its head now, which has been a long time coming. We've always been lobbying for that executive top-down support for cyber. But now to be with the second most worrying concern from a board level shows how important it is that cybersecurity is taken seriously within organizations. Reliance on technology is at an all-time high. It is constantly being exploited by adversaries. It's quite scary in terms of how easy it is to compromise businesses. I do that for a living. And as I always say, there hasn't been one company that we haven't been able to breach, not one. I'm waiting for that day, but it is almost too easy these days to bypass the security controls and take over or destroy data and infrastructure. On top of that, there's been increased legislation requirements, which is also kind of helping the board be aware that they are now actually responsible. So there are 4 key acts and obligations that directors now fall under and have to act as a director. Now I sit as a director on a number of other companies, including some charities. But board members are now personally liable if cybersecurity hasn't been properly rolled out or administered. So you've got the Corporations Act now with deeper penalties and more stringent requirements. The Privacy Act's always being updated. I'm sure you would have heard of the mandatory data breach notification law, that if you are breached and publicly identifiable information or information that could cause harm for your customers or clients, you need to actually inform the Information Commissioner. And then you've got the Australian Consumer Law. All of these have cybersecurity requirements. And again, personally liable to the board and to the directors. From a statistics point of view, this report was released last year by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre in Canberra. Queensland reported the highest number of cybercrime incidents. Now, these are reported incidents. This is actually when companies have actually had an incident and actually reported this to the authorities, and it's now being recorded. Take the statistic as you will. I think it shows, people becoming more aware and reporting. Unfortunately, I think, it's grossly misreported or underreported, probably is a better word. Because as I said, these are the ones who are voluntarily logging a case with these agencies. Of all of that, ransomware is the largest one. I'll dig into that, but it is still the most significant threat to your business. And phishing and spear phishing, which I'll cover off later, are the preferred methods of delivering these payloads into an organization, bypassing your traditional perimeter wall defenses. Now that's a big mouthful, but I'll unpack that a little bit. On top of all of what I've just said is the very, very real and worrying concern that there are some very sophisticated tools, and I'm talking cyber weapons, developed, usually under the guise of good faith by governments to defend themselves and to attack, but have now inevitably made their way into criminals' hands. And this is a story as old as time, from the atomic bomb that was used to end World War II. Now North Korea has that technology. From the modern machine gun that was again used as a deterrent is now in terrorist hands. It's no different to cyber. A few years ago, the NSA, the top secret organization in America, had its most powerful tools stolen by criminals. If you have a look at that little map at the bottom there, this was the Wannacry outbreak, when the criminals decided to merge that weapon with a ransomware variant, and it exploded across the world. Now, this was by no means perfected. You can actually see it detonating there, but how quickly and vulnerable the world is to this type of attack. And make no mistake, this attack will happen again. There have been lessons learned on both sides, but it's a very real and worrying concern. And then, to make matters worse, in December last year, another very powerful cybersecurity company called FireEye and Mandiant, who are used by governments and major corporations to do testing and training and exploitation exercises, had their tools stolen. Now you can see where that's going to happen. Inevitably, those tools will end up in the wrong hands, and these are powerful, powerful tools. So again, something to be very aware of. So in terms of ransomware, and I hope you've understood. Ransomware is when your data and your systems are held to ransom by criminals until you pay you pay some money or some Bitcoin, and they will usually give you back your network, which is usually, again, it's a very important discussion that you need to have with your executive around the ethics and legal obligations around paying ransomware. But that aside, it's a very fast-moving, dynamic market, ransomware in itself, and it's changing. It's always changing. These guys are, changing tactics, working out the best way to extort victims. So, in terms of the ransomware innovations that we've seen, is a lot more reconnaissance being done on companies before they will target you. They will spend an increasingly amount of time looking at your systems, paying for intelligence, working where your weakest link is and where your vulnerabilities are, so that when you are attacked, that your critical systems are usually taken down. The price, if you don't pay, and I will demonstrate this after this slide, is that it's like a ticking time bomb. The minute you see that red screen, there's a timer that goes off and it starts to count down. If you don't pay within that specific time, the price goes up. They will now offer to decrypt a portion of your files. So some of the clients that we deal with are just in disbelief. They're like, no, that's not true. But on the ransomware page that pops up, all of a sudden you can actually see your files. They will give you the first 6 files free, just to show you, that they've got your whole database or whatever records on file. The targeting specific sectors like yourselves that are very vulnerable, we have seen a huge uptake in critical infrastructure environments, where you cannot afford to be down. And businesses they'll pay whatever they can, otherwise they will literally go insolvent. Or, imagine water, power. They cannot afford to have these services down. You've seen the pipeline, or I hope you've seen the pipeline attack a couple of weeks ago, months now, in the States. Second last one, again, this is a double extortion. Not only will they ransom your data, but they will then threaten to release this publicly. And some of the data that they're finding, depending on what industry you're working, is very, very sensitive. It would be catastrophic that if it was released to the open market. But again, this is a methodology to extort you. The advertising campaign. So what does that look like? Well, here it is. If you ever see this on your computer, things are about to get extremely bad if you haven't got some strategies in place. But this is a Wannacry outbreak. So technically, what you're seeing here is the ability to not get access to any of your systems. So on the left there, you've got your clock counting down. You can see the Bitcoin price that they will start the negotiation. There is up to the left in that window, there is a sample copy of your files to say we've got them and we will be releasing that. And usually after you've got this, you will get an email which looks like this. Again, this is all real, saying you've now been hit by ransomware. And yes, you can get your data back. They're very, very responsive. They're almost, professionally responsive in terms of, once you've been hacked, they will work with you to try and get you to pay and, and start to give you your keys to kind of unlock. But again, that's another conversation, because usually you're just opening yourself up to all sorts of problems if you do pay the ransom. So at the bottom there in the red, I've highlighted there saying, just in case you ignore us, they will release this. And this happens all the time. There are publicly available sites where you can see companies that have been hacked and these criminals just releasing very sensitive information as a punishment or an incentive to pay. Okay, so from a ransomware point of view, nothing has changed in terms of the delivery method. The top 3 ways are through what we call business email compromise, or the top 2. And that is an email that's bypassed your perimeter defenses saying, please click on me, or an email with a link that hasn't been picked up by your security software. Again, it seems like such an easy way of doing it, but it is just so easy to click on these links, and the damage can be extraordinary. The third one, a little less common. These are exploit kits, but it does happen. Did one a couple of weeks ago with a company that had an unpatched firewall, and the criminals basically uploaded a malware directly into the environment. So there was no email delivered per se, but it was just a firewall that had an open port, and this kit was just delivered. We call that a payload, and the payload was detonated, shut the entire manufacturing facility down. It's been months now, and they're still not up and running. So I talk a lot around the fog of war, and I'm trying to draw an analogy here, is that our environment's becoming more and more complicated, more technical. It's very, very difficult to understand your threat surface. Again, this is a story as old as time. If you don't have visibility of your environment or where your weaknesses are, well, then how do you protect it? It's the same with cybersecurity. You've got to have visibility. It should be the #1 priority for all companies, is to understand, can they see a threat in the organization? Can they identify it? The key here is that it's an inevitability you are going to be hit by some sort of cyber incident, but to see it, to detect it, to reduce that dwell time is vital. So I put there, you can't protect what you can't see. On that note, it's more important in our current state to know our weaknesses and our strengths. This is a diagram that we typically do for companies, and we baseline an organization's ability or their cybersecurity posture. And to put it plainly, is that in this particular one, you can see, this company has done a lot around securing their storage. So they've got best of breed technology around security and storage, but their network security is very, very immature. They have no policies and procedures for staff around hygiene. There's no incident response plan. These are all areas that, as a criminal or company such as ourselves who use those same methodologies, would exploit. Architecture, if it hasn't been designed, if it's a flat network, again, very, very easy to compromise. And again, these are military tactics. A lot of our adversaries in this case have been trained by the military, and it's a standard flanking attack. You come in the front door and you rattle the gates, and everyone runs to the gates. But the main attack will usually come through an area that's not being monitored. For example, we had one earlier this year with a company that was attacked through their firewall, which was called a DDoS attack, which is basically lots of traffic hitting your firewall and your firewall's freaking out. But that was just purely a diversionary tactic. The main attack came through the back with an email sent to the CEO or CFO, I can't remember directly, but that particular attack, he was under enormous pressure that the company was under attack, that he clicked on the email had the malicious payload, but it was a diversionary tactic. So again, here's a complicated slide, but the point I'm trying to make is that once you've breached your perimeter defenses, whether it's your firewall or other security controls, your endpoint, the actual active attack usually takes place. And there are steps from looking for people with high level privileges within the organization, stealing people's usernames and passwords for attacks, or your third parties. Lateral movement is a big thing, and simply put, you have what's called north-south traffic, so that's your internet going out into the internet and back. But there's also traffic. There's 85% of your network traffic is what we call east-south. That's emailing between organizations. That's a lot of traffic that can be disrupted, stolen, and usually not protected very well. And then towards the end of the attack, once they've taken all you know, of your crown jewels, there's a lot of exfiltration, sending that data out, usually then holding your network to ransom, and the impact to the organization, well, that really is, yeah, it can be unrecoverable in some stages. So I've put together 3 lessons from the front line. I've spoken with my team, and those incidents that I showed at the beginning of this deck, if those companies had put in place some of these strategies, could have very well prevented these attacks. Again, not overly technical, but I'm always surprised about the amount of companies, and very large companies, who don't have the very basic cybersecurity principles in place. Number 1, multi-factor authentication. Again, it is absolutely critical that this is rolled out. With a lot of people moving to the cloud, their credentials are all over the place. If I was to steal your username and password, and I'll demonstrate how easy that is soon, a multi-factor authentication security would stop a majority of those attacks from overseas, right? It says, well, why are you logging in from overseas? You know, you're working on the Sunshine Coast, so it would not allow you. The pushback from business over the years has been very, very frustrating for us, but we are seeing the tides turning. But again, it is probably the number 1 most effective tool that you could put in that could mitigate these threats. Again, just to reinforce passwords, on the left there is real time, how quickly we are now able to crack normal passwords. It is very, very frightening. That being said, the use of passphrases it will usually be enough of a deterrent on most cases. Even better, a password manager creating very complex passwords is a must. I mean, we use it all the time. I highly suggest that you use a password manager. No 2 passwords should be the same. Those days are gone, because people will just absolutely brute force all your other accounts. And again, that screen on the left there, that's how quickly, we're talking milliseconds now, the amount of compute and power that can be used to break passwords. Number 2, and this is a big one, is I've called them threat assessments, validation, and reporting. So what I mean about that is getting a third-party provider to come and test your environment. And the reason I want to do that is that most companies have a level of familiarity and complacency. You start to become, you know, blind in your own environment. Having a threat assessment done, or a penetration test, it should be at least once a year. But it is a tool and a tactic used by companies such as myself, and there's plenty of other companies there who will look at common attack vectors and use that to see what your level of your risk is. And we look at, you know, from your staff training to your wireless, your external facing environments, your internal facing environments, you know, how your physical environments as well. Each one of these represents a risk to the business, and a good pen testing report should give you at least almost like a roadmap of improvement, a security roadmap to say, okay, you know, they got in through our wireless. We need to change the passwords there. We need to put a little bit more security controls. Or our staff were particularly susceptible to email or phishing. Maybe we need to spend a little bit of time on that. The second point there is the ability to respond to these type of threats. Again, I would be really interested to see how many of you have an incident response plan. And if you do have an incident response plan, how many of you have actually done a tabletop exercise or tested that? Because I can tell you straight away, maybe this year, 4 or 5 of the breaches and forensic investigations that we've done, companies did have an incident response plan. When they were breached, it was completely redundant, useless. It hadn't been tested. All the dependencies fell to the floor, and we had to go in there blind, build it up from scratch, which is a very, very expensive and time-consuming exercise. So having a proper incident response plan, understanding people's roles and responsibilities, And let me go one step further. Say you were hit with a ransomware attack and you've got this ticking time bomb coming there, and your data is vitally important. Would you be able to pay the ransom? Would you pay the ransom? You know, you need to know whether you would or not, because that actually has implications downstream. But you don't have 12 hours to discuss it at a board meeting. You've got hours, sometimes minutes, to work out whether you pay or you don't. And again, I touched on the moral and ethical. Technically, it's illegal to pay a ransom in Australia. You could be inadvertently funding terrorism. So if you pay the ransom, and the public says, "Well, hang on a second, you're funding terrorists." I mean, there's a whole tunnel you don't want to go down. So this is what a pen test report typically does. I've used my own here. It's been obfuscated, but it's a proper report. A pen test report will set down key objectives. It's usually, it can be a 5 or a 2 week engagement. But again, it's a very powerful tool. So just to show you what this looks like, we go through your environment, or a pen testing company will go through your environment and look at all the likelihoods and the risks. But not only that, they will use exactly the same tools and methodologies that criminals will be using. So you can see the value of having this done, because not only do you understand your weaknesses, but there's also the mitigation strategies that are usually in place to say, okay, we got in through this particular server or this particular person. You need to spend some time here. You need to close those doors. And it's literally closing doors, testing, closing doors. But again, I'm always amazed that when these reports are given to companies, those that don't act on them, it's at their own risk. I mean, it's a folly not to close these things. Again, I see almost 2 types of companies: one who would do this exercise as a compliance, and the others who are doing this to really increase their security posture. There's no point getting a pen test or a security assurance test done if you're not going to do anything about it. It's just a waste of money. And again, if we were to do something like this for you, identify a vulnerability, and you don't fix it, the likelihood of that happening is massive. And it happens to us all the time, saying, this was put in your report, you didn't do it, it would usually be exploited. For those who like risk, usually these findings are then put into a risk matrix. High, medium, low. Again, it's a security roadmap. It shows you where you should be concentrating on. So if you remember that graph I showed you where the weaknesses are, that would be represented there, and it would show me where I should be spending my time and effort on closing up those weaknesses, those back doors that are leaving me open in the wind. Just lightly on incident response plans. Again, it's a key. Really, every company should have this, and I hope most of you do. If you don't, now is the time. There's no point in having an incident response plan after you've been breached. But some tips for us when we get called in, you do need to react as quickly as possible. When you're hit, particularly with ransomware, it spreads out. It's very, very contagious. It's just like a virus, really. So that the quicker you can contain is very, very important. Don't declare mission accomplished quickly. Just because you can build up your environment after you've been breached, there does need to be some retrospective looking. You have to work out how it came in. Has it gone dormant? Am I still able to be breached in that same way? Visibility is crucial. The amount of companies that we deal with who don't have proper logging in place, so that when we come in and need to look at your logs and do some forensic analysis, if you don't have some minimal viable logs there, we can't ever tell you how you got breached. We can help you rebuild and get you back up and running, hopefully, but we'd still like to know how it got in. Who was it that clicked on this, or how was it delivered? Visibility, again, is key. That goes back to that fog of war. And number 4 is it's okay to ask for help. And what I mean by that is that some of these are very sophisticated. and that your IT department, even if there is a security person in charge there, it can be completely overwhelming if you don't do this day in and day out. A lot of the time people just go, I give up, I'm not going to do this, and literally walk off the job. So to have some idea of who you would call if this was to happen is very important, because again, time is ticking. You need to be able to contain the threat and remediate as quickly as possible. On the left there is basically an incident response methodology around the preparing for when it does happen, and then the importance of detection and how you will respond. Last tip, number 3, I've called that segmentation, patching, and backup. So segmentation first. Segmentation, and I hope you can see here, I've put a diagram of a submarine. Segmenting a network means that if you are infected, it doesn't infect another part of the your network, that it is isolated. It's a very good defensive strategy to have. Take, for example, this submarine here. If a submarine is segmented, and I think most of them are, and you can use the Titanic, for example, if you are breached in a certain point, it's contained. The submarine can still remain its integrity. But if you don't contain your network and you are breached through the perimeter, which we see all the time, you will quickly become flooded, and the whole environment is infected. So let's look at ransomware there for a second. If ransomware got into one system, that is easily contained if it's segmented. But if it gets onto one, the speed that it's going through these days, it can be on everyone's computer within minutes. And then you've got a whole world of problems there. So segmentation is something that we're advocating for very, very strongly within the market. Second one there is data backups, and most companies do that, but the importance of testing those backups is crucial. Again, and these are all frontline stories. If you are hit when it comes time to backup, if you haven't actually practiced restoring from backup, you could be missing critical systems. Maybe those backups are compromised. A couple of very sad stories we've had was that they had the backups on the network. So not only did the ransomware hit the environment, but it also hit the backup. So you can't restore from backups. So you're pretty much, you're flying blind by that stage. And then the third one there is patching. I know everyone should understand patching when you get that annoying little box saying updates are available. It's absolutely critical that those patches are used. What it means is that there are known vulnerabilities now out there targeting systems that haven't been patched. So patching, again, is very, very important, and it can't be ignored. That Wannacry map that I showed you with the detonation, those were unpatched. So those were systems that hadn't been patched when that vulnerability was released. Those are my top 3. If you really wanted to take this seriously, ideally you'd like to have a culture of cybersecurity, and by that I mean that you have what we call people, process, and technology. People that your leadership is running and sponsoring this, they're leading the way there, that you do training and you are drilling for this type of attack, and incentivizing people to practice good cyber security hygiene. And processes are around your policies and procedures. Some of the attacks we've seen are, you couldn't even call them cyber. There are people calling up a phone saying, hey, we've changed our banking details, or an email to the finance department or HR saying, my name's John Doe and I've changed my banking details. Please put my pay into that. Now, technically that's not a cyber incident. It's using technology, but that to me shows you a lack of process and policies. We're getting a lot of spoofed emails from CEOs and CFOs authorizing payments to third-party suppliers. Again, you shouldn't be able to authorize payments over the phone, particularly over email. There should be some type of verification, even a phone call. That should be done. Again, that's around governance. Process, we've discussed the importance of testing these controls as well. PenTest will, when we do a social engineering attack on a company, we will test your staff's availability or susceptibility rather, of would we be able to socially engineer them to give us their username and password. You'll be surprised at how easy people will do that. And then technology, and I put technology at the last there because there is no silver bullet. There is no magic firewall that will protect you from these type of threats. It's just never, ever going to happen. But it does play an important part. So technology that can provide you visibility, technology that plays well together. You know, you don't want to have these point products of 12 different security products that they don't talk together, because, you know, when things talk together nicely, then you've got collaboration. When you've got collaboration, you've got visibility. And thirdly, technology that can provide rapid detection and mitigation. Again, it's an inevitability that you will be hit. How quickly you can detect that threat and respond is the key to all this. Just a quick one on staff training. Again, we all do our fire training and we have dedicated fire wardens. What would be ideal is that all staff are trained in a basic cybersecurity course, or an understanding of how, you know, from your warehouse to your CEO, everyone has a responsibility for protecting the place that they work at. Now, I'm not saying, you know, companies don't burn down with fire, but everyone has a good idea of the evacuation plan and what to do in a fire. And I would say that's relatively low risk. But the risk of a cybersecurity incident, this security incident, is very high. But how much training has your staff done around, you know, reporting an incident or something suspicious? I would actually say it's probably rather low, but it's the higher risk to your organization. I've got a little thing here which I call repeat offenders, and these are things I see on a common occurrence, and really this has to stop. It is now too risky, and it's only going to get worse. And these are walking by people's computers with little yellow post-it notes with usernames and passwords, displaying your Wi-Fi password to the internet. Even going so far as to saying is you're not taking the physical controls seriously. You know, we constantly, if we can't reach you over the internet, I'll just walk in through a front door. I've got a team who specialize in delivering boxes or dropping USBs. But when things aren't locked away properly or passwords are in plain sight, it really is almost too easy and something that is exploited on a daily basis. So this type of stuff, you know, it's time for a change. I touched slightly there on phishing exercises. And look, it's a really good thing to do with a company. Basically, it baselines, you know, your employees' ability to detect and report emails. So you see that email is the preferred method of delivering these threats. So doing a phishing exercise. Now, this is actually a real exercise I've got here in front. This is one that we did recently for a particular sub department. And so we sent 10 malicious emails. Of that, 8 clicked. So 8 opened, 8 actually clicked on the link. That in itself is scary, right? Like that is, but I would go to say is that's normal for us. So 8 out of 10 people would click on an email and click on the link, potentially delivering malware. Of that, on this particular exercise, we also asked them to submit their username and password. 6 of the 10 then gave us their credentials. So not only did they click on the link, but they then gave us their credentials. Like, it's a double whammy, right? So this immediately shows that training needs to be done. And I'm not saying train with a stick. There's some really clever ways you can start to, you know, increase awareness. For example, I'm not sure you know this, but the best place to put a poster, an awareness poster in an organization, is on the back of a toilet door. And think about it, there's people who are going to be thinking they're staring at this and hopefully understanding the risk. You know, employees that regularly report suspicious emails should be given some type of hamper or a movie ticket where you're actually creating this culture of awareness rather than whacking them with a stick. But these things can start to, you know, develop and people understand the risks. So doing a phishing exercise, highly recommended. You know, from a metrics point of view, if you wanted to report this up to the executives, I mean, you could do a phishing campaign 1 quarter, run some basic training, and then run another phishing campaign the following quarter, and you should hopefully see some, measurable difference in the awareness. So here we've got an 8 out of 10 click rate. If you could drop that down to 4 or 5, I mean, that would be amazing, right? Even better, a 1 in 10. I'd give you a gold cup if you could get it down that low. And then there's our old friend, governance, risk, and compliance. Now, this is what we talk around about cybersecurity journey. And again, the industry globally is going down this route. So it's some form or some way you are going to be exposed to this. And this is really around, minimum compliance states legislated or required not only by the government, but, other companies or the suppliers you deal with. They'll want to say, do you align with cybersecurity standards? Now, where that could be an ISO 27001, which is the information security framework, or there's another one called NIST, which is a little less complex, but just as well recognized and understood. And again, at some form, you are going to come across this. And so it's a good idea to get across it, understand where you sit. Now, you don't have to be certified in this framework, but it's a good idea to align with it, at least do the best practices. It does have a trickle-down effect into a company's organization and culture. There are lots of resources available federally as well. So you have the Australian Signals Directorate, they have the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, they have mitigations and strategies to protect against cyber. So they have what they call the Essential 8. I've given you my top 3. They've got 8, which you should be doing, which they call critical. But then there's another 35 other things that companies can be doing. There's lots of help available, actually maybe not help, advice from the authorities and different agencies. Just why I said help, it can be quite lonely if you do get hit. There is no magical company who will come and clear it all the way for you. No one's going to do this for you for free. I just want to make that certainly clear. The responsibility usually will lie on you to get you up and running. And then just lastly on technology. So there are a growing amount of companies and services that can assist companies. And myself is one. We have a security operations center here based in Brisbane, where we have a team of people continually monitoring environments, looking for those blips in the system that are showing that something's gone wrong. But there's other things that you can do. You can look at security event management software. We call them SIEMs. Again, it's kind of like a light security operations center. Again, it's plugging into your environment, constantly monitoring it. You can have things like incident response retainers. That is there in case you do get attacked, that you pick up a phone, that you'll have a response within hours, not days, and that they'll typically work with you on an incident response plan. Vulnerability management, or we call VMS, that goes to patching. That's looking at your systems continuously, saying this needs to be patched, you need to do this, this is a high level threat, you need to patch that. And then there's innovations in technology around next generation firewalls that are able to sandbox malicious emails, and endpoint detections that's sitting on your phone and on your laptops that can detect more sophisticated threats. As I wrap up here, I'm calling this the disappearing safety net. A couple of weeks ago, after the pipeline attack in America, AXA, which is a very, very large French insurance company, notified the market that they will no longer be paying ransomware crime payments. Now, this in itself, and I've been saying this for a number of years, was always going to happen. I didn't expect it to happen this quickly, but a lot of companies that we deal with have cyber insurance, and part of that cyber insurance policy, they will pay the ransomware fee to the criminals to get your data back. Now, there's 2 problems with that. One is that we've seen it time and time again, and in particular, in one recent case that we did, where the criminals went in, stole everything, encrypted everything, found the insurance policy, then went to the CEO and said, we've got your company under complete lock, but don't worry, here's a copy of your cyber insurance policy. Activate this policy, we'll get our ransom, you'll get your files back. Now you can see this is basically incentivizing criminals to keep attacking, right? So AXA it has decided, well, no, that's not going to top. Now, I've called that a disappearing safety net because the amount of companies that I've seen said, oh, hey, Will, don't worry, we've got cyber insurance, and our insurance company will pay for it. Again, well, that's not the case anymore. And I predict that this is going to now have a trickle-down effect. So that incentive to put those risks, those strategies in place are never more reliant. Now, incidentally, the minute AXA published that, this happened the following week. So after dropping the support for ransomware, they actually then got hit by ransomware. There's an irony in that. So that kind of wraps up my presentation. I hope you found it valuable. I guess from that boxing analogy at the front there, it's a very defensive game. If you can learn to dodge and weave when attacks happen, you are going to be in a much better state. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. I guess if anyone has any questions, I meant to mention that at the start, and I apologise, I forgot again. But there is the Q&A button on the screen there. So if there is any questions, just pop it in there, and then we'll do our best to answer them. I guess one question that I've got is around the size of an organisation. Does that make a huge difference in terms of what they've got the ability to control, or how you react?
No, good question. No, it's not. I mean, again, it's not personal. A lot of these attacks, initially, the initial attack is done through scanning of the internet, right? So once it's an automated scanning activity, they will blanket, and as soon as someone pings or they identify a vulnerable company, that's when they will start to kind of go in. So you could be a 10-person company to a 5,000 person company. If you have a weakness in your system, it will be exploited.
And so I guess for smaller organisations, the risk is still just as real, but I guess they're...
Massively. I sit on the Queensland Law Society Cyber Advisory Group, and that particular sector, so you're in the finance, but the legal sector is massively under an enormous amount of attack. And these are small law firms all around Australia. And again, they're very vulnerable to this type of attack. But again, think about it, they're also in charge of very sensitive information, lots of money being moved around the place. They're an attractive target.
Okay. Yeah, I guess there's a lot to think about, and I suppose it's the key is getting the training started, getting that awareness so people stop clicking on links, and then building it up from there. I guess you don't have to have a team of experts on board, but you've got to have some very basic fundamentals right. Yeah,
correct. Look again, if you have to take one out of the three, that multi-factor authentication is a good start. Understanding that it can be a bit of a pain, but it is well worth the pain to protect your environment.
Yeah, and I agree. I find that because it's becoming much more common, you're getting much more used to it. It might have only been one system, and that was a pain, but now you've got 3 or 4 systems all doing multi-factor authentication. It's like, oh, okay. It's just trying to keep track of which text message belongs to which system when you're logging in.
Correct. But again, the benefits far outweigh the pain.
Very good. All right, we don't seem to have any other questions at this stage, so we might wrap it up there. Look, thank you very much for your time. It's always a fascinating area, and the level of threat just continues to grow. So we really do appreciate you taking the time to share that with us as finance people. There is a post-webinar survey for any attendees to fill out. We'd like to get your feedback. And also just like to mention our finance forum coming up in July, the 22nd of July in Brisbane and 23rd of July in Cairns. If you haven't registered and you are interested in going, please register as soon as possible because of various COVID restrictions on venues. We will have a cap on numbers. But yeah, please, if you're interested, check that out and get registered. And our next webinar will be in August, the 26th of August. And again, we're branching a little bit away from direct finance, but we're looking at probity reviews and how that might be of interest to our finance professionals across Queensland. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for your time. And we'll see you hopefully in Brisbane or Cairns.